Hi, it's Jo from Minerva. Today's little top sewing tip is to sew around curves. So let me show you a few tips for sewing around curves. Number one, go really slowly. And number two, mark where you're going to sew so that you can be accurate around all of the edge, because it's very difficult to keep your seam allowance the same when you're lifting the foot, turning, putting it down, moving. Sometimes you get a little, it's not a curve, it's a sort of tracing to get to the end. So let me show you a few tips for sewing around curves. So because we've got a curved hem of a pocket, we don't want to have lots of little puckers and creases in it. So within the seam allowance, you're going to do a little row of easing stitches. So that's some stitches that you can just pull up a little bit. You're not going to have a gather in it, it's just enough. In fact, it's almost done it itself, look. Just enough to draw that corner around, and then you can press it again. So those ease stitches are just, that little ripple there is enough to bring that curve in. So my first tip is to mark the seam allowance. You can do that a couple of different ways. You can use a seam gauge and a chalk, and you can mark, and you can just keep going around and then join up your dots, which is fine if you just got a little curve. I've got quite a bit to go here. Or you could use a prim with this rolling arm on. So this prim tool is a chalk marker with a wheel in it, so the chalk comes out of there. And then this bit extension here will mark the edge of your fabric or the edge of your paper. So if I have it on its first mark, then when I measure between the wheel and the chalk, it's 1.5. So if I run the wheel along the edge of the fabric, then my chalk line is bang on 1.5. I'll just draw it on for you to see. I've been doing lots of drawing on this. And it'll keep going round. And if you're going round a curve, you can make sure that you're keeping the edge of the wheel on the edge of that curve. And then when I have this part of a pinafore, so when I have this, I will have exactly the same curve shape on both parts of my pinafore. Really useful if you're making children's dresses, children's little dungarees, toddler dungarees, because then you'll get the same shape on both sides. So it's the same as just doing it with a tape measure, it's just a little bit faster. So mark on all the way around so that you can follow that seam line, and then I'll show you number 2 tip for getting good curves, which is clipping and notching. If you're sewing curves, once you've got your even seam allowance, you then need to grade out, it's called layering or grading your seam. You need to take out one of the seam allowances. If one of them is interfaced, then take that one out because that will be the thickest. And when you take that out, you'll be able to fold down the fabric more easily without so much bulk right under that seam allowance. So that's the first thing to do. Next thing you can do to get good curves is to cut out some little V shapes, because when we turn that inside out, all of this fabric is trying to bunch into that small space So if we can get rid of some of that fabric, then there's not so much to try and fit into the space. So if you take out some notches, some actual V shapes, then there'll be lots less fabric trying to squeeze into that small area. So you can take out as many as you want, but you need to get quite close to the seam allowance without cutting it. If you want to take some more off, it's all going to be on the inside, so it's about getting a good finish, not on the outside, not just making it look neat inside. There we are. So when we turn that now, there won't be so much fabric trying to fit into that small space. This seam is the opposite, so this one needs some little slits cutting in it so that the fabric can spread out behind, because there's not enough fabric to go around this curve. So on this one, I'm going to take some little slits up to the seam allowance so that when that's turned out, they can spread out a little bit. Here we've done them so they can move in together. That's when you cut out these notched triangles, and these little splits are so that the fabric can spread. So you keep working round. I used to do this with big dressmaking scissors, and the amount of times that I was inaccurate and cut in my stitch line, or I caught my scissors on something else. Little machine scissors are so much more controllable. The tips are more agile. You can get really close to the ends, look, because they're sharp on the ends. You don't have to keep relying on using that big V bit at the back of your scissors. So this one is the V's, because this is a convex curve, and this one is the little notches, because that is a concave one. Okay, if you've done all that clipping and notching, it's time to turn your work the right side out and see if you need to make any adjustments to allow for extra fabric. Your seam gauge with the point on the end is very useful here because it's blunt. If you start jabbing scissors in it, you can go right through. So I'm just going to use that to work those right angle corners out. And we can see now that that curve lies pretty flat because it's been split behind, so it can open out and make that shape. If you're working a curve, then you need to make sure that you keep your facing on the inside if you can. So you need it your facing just to roll to the inside, so that on the right side none of the facing is showing, and you'll be pressing that as well. This is cord, so I'm going to press it with a crush cloth so that I don't crush the pile and make like sort of shiny marks on my dress. And that's how you sew an accurate curve. I'll be back with more sewing shorts on another video, so join me again. Thanks very much for watching. Bye bye.